We have Patrick Tanui, Head of Policy and Regional Strategy at Gogla. We have Stephen Hunt, Senior Energy Innovation Advisor at the Research and Evidence Directorate of the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office of the UK Government. We have Alice Goodbrook, Innovation Lead at Innovate UK, which leads the Energy Catalyst Initiative. And then Ieva Indriniata, who's Policy and Partnerships Lead at CAMCO, which leads the Renewable Energy Performance Platform. So across those speakers, we have a wealth of experience, insights, perspectives to bring on the role that clean energy access and innovation in this space has to play. And it's never been more important to be exploring, understanding, and working on this topic. While fantastic progress has been made, particularly on household electrification, there's a lot of work to do, and we really need to accelerate progress if we're to achieve Sustainable Development Goal 7 by 2030. So alongside the existing proven solutions that we need to roll out at speed and scale, we also see a really critical role for innovation in reducing costs, reaching hard to serve areas, and accelerating that transition, which not only helps us to achieve Sustainable Development Goal 7, but also delivers on a whole range of social, economic and climate goals around the world. So we're delighted you could join us today, and what we'll do is we'll go through each of the speakers on the panel, and they can share some of their perspectives from the work they're doing, what they're seeing is working, what's not, some of the lessons they're learning from this range of activity across the clean energy access sector. And then we'll open up to questions from the audience and to those joining us online. So prepare your questions, get ready to ask some challenging, provocative thoughts to our panel, who'd be delighted to get stuck into them. So without further ado, let me hand over first to Felicity Tolley from the Energy Savings Trust, which we have co-organised this session with, to share some of their perspectives from the Efficiency for Access Coalition. So Emilie, over to you to introduce the work you do and share a little more about some of what you're seeing, particularly in terms of the role that efficient appliances have to play and innovation in that space in accelerating progress towards SDG 7.
People hear me? Oh, a button. I should have pressed the button. Felicity, not Emilie. Emilie's my manager. Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming to see us today. Energy Saving Trust deliver the co-secretariat function for the Efficiency for Access Coalition in partnership with CLASP. This is a global coalition of donors and program implementers working to accelerate access to clean energy for the poorest people in the world through affordable, high-performing and inclusive appliances. We have 20 donor roundtable members, 19 program partners, 34 investor network members as well, and we have programs operating and initiatives in 62 countries and across 34 different technologies. So it's a really great platform for collaboration, the coalition. Energy Saving Trust also deliver the Low Energy Inclusive Appliances Programme, again in partnership with CLASP, funded by UK Aid and IKEA Foundation. And this falls under the Efficiency for Access banner. This is a research and innovation programme that aims to double the efficiency and halve the cost of a range of off and weak grid appliances in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. And these appliances not only enable improved access to energy, reduce carbon emissions, but also lead to improved livelihoods, more reliable food security, improved access to healthcare, and resilience to climate change as well. Very briefly, some of the areas of work that we do include market stimulation through awards and prizes for innovation, testing and quality assurance to ensure good quality and standards for not only the technologies themselves, but the ways they are distributed and maintained. We deliver market intelligence and road mapping through our primary and secondary research and our works with our technical working groups as well. And we offer research and development funding to stimulate the private sector innovation and engagement. And finally, we provide strategic communications to make sure that we can build awareness of this opportunity among all of our stakeholders. In terms of kind of our perspective, when we talk about efficiency, we're not just talking about technical developments, although obviously having a more efficient appliances frees up a limited electricity supply to engage with other appliances, to use it for other ways. But we can also talk about efficiency in terms of time and effort saved for our users, in terms of the way appliances interact with each other, moving towards interoperability and the Internet of Things. And we can talk about efficiency in terms of use of finance and business models, looking across the whole value chain from manufacturing and distribution through to the end of life for some of these appliances. And overall, efficiency is a really key ingredient for delivery of Sustainable Development Goal 7, Universal Energy Access for All by 2030.
Great, thank you, Felicity. Very exciting initiative and a range of work that you're involved in the sector. I wonder perhaps for our audience and those joining us online, if you could bring to life some of the technologies and business models, innovations you're seeing in that appliance space, perhaps in some of the countries you've worked in, or the companies that you're supporting through that through the initiatives you just introduced.
Sure. So there are a range of technologies that fall under this category, and we really, the whole market starts with off-grid lighting, as I'm sure we'll hear about from Patrick, but we're moving towards thinking about productive use appliances more in recent years, and those are appliances that generate an income for the user, whether that's a household or a business, or even perhaps members of industry. And that can be anything from a solar water pump to improve the amount of irrigation available for farmlands, through to a refrigerator in a home that allows somebody to provide cold drinks, to provision of internet access that people will pay for. Innovations there's multitudes of innovations. We've provided over £4 million of research and development funding. I think the example that comes to mind is one of Agsol, a Kenyan-based engineering firm who've developed a micro mill in an aim to improve accessibility to milling machines for rural people, but also to improve the affordability of running of these mills for the people that operate them. At the moment, the main kind of automated milling market is around diesel mills or AC large-scale mills, which require a grid connection to run. And these are large-scale, require large loads to make them operable and affordable, and are usually based in more urban areas. There's lots of challenges associated with these. For example, diesel mills are expensive to run. About 40% of the revenue will go on fuel and maintenance. And diesel mills as well lead to flour that tastes like diesel, which people don't tend to enjoy. Agsol received some research and development funding from us, and they've developed a micro mill that's genuinely about this big, and it operates on solar microgrids or by cycling on an e-bike. And what's really key about what they did is that they really understood the market need for smaller batches and more accessible mills that were more affordable to run. And they've delivered a mill that is 3 times more efficient than the AC mill alternative, and is more than 50% more profitable than the diesel alternative to run. And they did that by completely starting from scratch in their design, and it's a really, really effective design. That's just one example of the importance of understanding not only the customer need, but engaging with engineers and really innovating when thinking about solutions.
Super, thank you, Felicity. And we may come back to that productive use theme a little later in the panel. So thank you very much. Perhaps over to Alice Goodbrook now, who leads the Energy Catalyst Initiative at Innovate UK. Alice, you're providing a range of early stage grant, business support to help some of these innovative technology and business models to come through to meet clean energy access needs in Africa, Asia, and the Indo-Pacific. Could you tell us a little bit more about how you do that? What you think some of the the needs are in the market, and how Energy Catalyst is helping to meet that need?
Of course I can. So Energy Catalyst's mission is to accelerate the innovation and business models needed to help reach Sustainable Development Goals 7. And we do this in a number of ways. We give out financial support. So basically we give out grants. We give out a lot of grants, and that's my main kind of course of what we do. We also provide business support, and that's in the form of acceleration support. So we'll get people to work one-on-one with the businesses that we support in order to help them to grow and scale. But we also try and create strategic partnerships across countries because that ultimately helps improve the lives in Africa and Asia. So a lot of what we're doing is around getting the problem owners and the solution providers together to work equitably in order to put these projects into practice to make sure that the innovations that are being created across the world are actually fit for purpose. So kind of mention kind of what we roughly do. So there's kind of 3 key kind of areas that we cover. So we do collaboration building, and that's because all the grants that we provide, no matter if they're kind of the early stage feasibility or actually we fund all the way to late stage demonstrators, but they all have to be collaborative, and they all have to have international partners from the countries that we work in. And we work across Africa and Asia. There's like 70 odd countries that we're interested in working with. And so, but people need to meet each other. And I think we all found that with COVID, that as great as Zoom is, love it, actually meeting people in person, seeing the situations and finding out how you can help each other is really the best way to make collaboration. And then we've launched these big grant funding programs about once a year. It's normally around the £20 million mark, open to anywhere across the world, anyone from any organisation across the world. We're focusing on businesses, but we get academics involved, we get NGOs, anyone that can help create these innovative technologies and or business models. And it's worth noting a lot of what we do is around business models. You can see across the world, we've got sustainable energy technology. There's loads of it, but at the moment it's not cheap enough to deploy, and it's not always fit for the communities or the different countries that require it. And so it's about how do we innovate and change these and get the right business models in place to make sure that people can get energy access while still meeting net zero, but while still making it affordable for the people that need it. Because there's no point doing it if people can't afford the energy that we're trying to give them. We also kind of work a lot with different accelerators from across the world to try and get the understanding that Energy Catalyst has got in the years it has been working, and to share that knowledge and to get knowledge from overseas to bring it back to make the program better. In terms of kind of the size of the program, it's got quite big. It's about £200 million program now. It's funded over 400 projects. There's over 1,000 organisations. Though it's open to about 72 countries, I think we're working about 38 of them at the moment. So there's quite a broad spectrum of different things that we're approaching. And we see the big need, Felicity mentioned it a minute ago, is around productive use. So brilliant, we can get some basic lights in places, but is that going far enough? Normally not. Actually, how can you create mini grids with the right business models to enable productive use to make sure that communities can afford it? Because ultimately, if you're not creating a sustainable business model, it's going to be reliant on grant for far too long, and therefore it physically can't scale. And actually, if you look at SDG 7 and the opportunity there is, I think it's something like a 2.5 trillion market by 2030. That business opportunity is huge. If you take away the fact that actually it's a fundamental right that people should have access to energy, the ability for it to be sustainable is there. There is the economy for it. We just have to create the right companies in order to enable that to happen.
Great, thank you, Alice. Perhaps similar to Felicity, it would be great to hear a little more about perhaps an example of a company in the portfolio that can perhaps bring it to life for people. What are some of these innovations, how they're helping to meet needs. And I'm conscious we're here on Gender Day at COP27, so perhaps if there was a few reflections you could share on the role that gender equality, social inclusion plays in helping these technologies, these business models to be deployed, and these ventures that you're supporting to thrive. Thank you.
And I thought you'd want me to go through all 400 projects, but we probably would be here all day. So in terms of to bring it back to kind of the core around gender, we have a big gender equality and social inclusion requirement as part of Energy Catalyst. We don't want people making businesses, innovations, or business models that don't fit the entire society. Because one, it doesn't make good business sense. What's the point of, in case of gender, cutting off half your potential customers? But two, it is the right thing to do in a fair and equitable society. We just got to do it. And actually where we're trying to take a lot of our innovators is understanding that, yeah, it's a good thing to do, but it makes business sense. And so one of the really good projects that we've got that has kind of seen this, and it's through the Energy Catalyst program has kind of developed it, is mobile power. Now in the UK, I kind of say mobile power is the Deliveroo of batteries, but I'm very aware that doesn't travel internationally. But however, basically they're batteries that can either power kind of phones, lights. They do bigger ones that can do electric vehicles and things like electric mopeds and things like that. And what they do is they charge them at a central hub, or a Mopo hub, and then they literally deliver them out to last mile distribution and end of where the mini grid's not reaching, to enable people to have sufficient energy, and they swap them over, and it's a pay-as-you-go model. But what this relies upon is having people to sell that service. So they require agents to go into the different communities and sell the energy that they can get and why it's better than, say, a diesel genset. Now, they tried multiple things, but actually they did some work and realized that female agents were actually it was not just great to be able to employ them and provide them a way of getting funding in, but actually they were better than the guys. And that's because a lot of the places they're working, like Sierra Leone and Nigeria, women run the household. So actually energy is a big part of what they're involved in. So it becomes their decision. And not only that, but women are less competitive, apparently, according to Mobile Power, when we speak to them. They generally help each other. So the sales in which they're able to create are massively bigger than if you just have a team of males doing it. And so actually, it becomes clear that this is brilliant because we're getting females involved in employment, but actually it makes really good business sense to them because for Mobile Power, they're just better agents, but without exploring that possibility and understanding the context in which their business is working in, they would not have known that and they wouldn't have been able to scale as much as they've been able to right now.
Great, thank you, Alice. Patrick, Gogla's doing some fantastic work around the enabling environment that these ventures that Felicity and Alice have been talking about are really working in. Just wondering if you could perhaps tell us a little bit more about some of the work that Gogla's doing to help improve the policy environment, the availability of data and insights on what's working that helps all these innovators that we're hearing about to succeed in the market.
Thank you very much, David, and good morning to everybody. I think as we start this conversation, we as an industry sector have done quite a bit in innovating, and when we look at right at the beginning of the SDG 7 goals, the former UN Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon, talked about how energy is this thread that really enables everything that we do. Whether you're in education, you're in healthcare, you're looking social, economic activities, whatever it is, energy is this thread that runs through that. And that's why providing energy is extremely important. Over the last decade, we've seen the private sector begin to really innovate and provide technology solutions that some are very new, things that were not there before. Some are applying energy solutions to existing real-world problems, be it in, for example, the agro-processing, fishing, education, healthcare, all these things that we're seeing the private sector apply innovation to make regular stuff that people do much more efficient, much easier to do, earn high levels of income or improve quality of life. However, as we now talk about how do we build an ecosystem that allows this innovation, there's a couple of areas that we're talking not just to governments, but also to partners about. One, around innovation, be it an international company based in the UK, the US, or even local firms, you need that level of funding that goes towards allowing a company to innovate, to be able to try, to be able to fail. And this is a problem that we see across. I think a lot of this is particularly even more relevant for the locally owned firms, that there's just not enough capital out there to allow an entrepreneur to say, I have an idea. I want to seek for funding and support to be able to try my product, develop my prototype, put it out there to see what works, and continue to innovate around it. And because of that, it really constrains that innovation. Then secondly, when you move from there, you look at the ecosystem, right? Does it allow for these innovations to be tried out in the ecosystem? And I'll give you a couple of examples. One, for example, we've seen, and this I think is some of the thought leadership we would like to see in Rwanda now around e-mobility and the application of electric motorbikes to use and adopt. And you find that the government in Rwanda has developed this policy that allows the motorbikes to be built in Rwanda, to be tested and piloted. They've actually even included, for example, that the charging stations for these motorbikes are enjoying the same tariff rate for energy access as to their industrial users. So it's really bringing down the cost of these electric motorbikes and the use of it. They've also provided incentives so that you can import the parts and components for those motorbikes without duty and VAT. So it's really trying to bring down the cost. I think the last element that I think I'd like to touch on is when we're talking about energy innovation, energy access, and also building resilience, and who we are really talking about are rural off-grid communities, who the fact is they are also the poorest. So no matter what technology we are talking about, if you're living on $1 a day, $2 a day, if you're just trying to survive every day, I don't know what business model you can really develop that says this person is going to be able to pay for and afford these products if we don't, one, find ways that they are able to access finance, which means changes in the financial system, or we bring new financial models out that allows them to be able to access credit. If we can also find ways to subsidize the cost of accessing those products so that they are not only as we make them available, they can actually access and be able to drive this. I think there's some interesting models that are out there. The work that EST is doing to really look at how do we make sure that these products that we bring are as efficient as possible, that they are appropriate quality, because it's the worst thing to try and dump products that don't work on those that are most in need. And I think there's good work that's being done to be able to ensure that we have proper standards. We make sure that we put in place consumer protection around even these products as we're developing. But we need a lot more sustained effort in this regard.
Great, thank you, Patrick. You touched on a number of important areas there. I'd like to dive into one of them a little more if we could, particularly around that role that local entrepreneurs play. Mm-hmm. You mentioned the importance of reaching the poorest and addressing some of these business model and financing challenges. And one of the things we've seen in the sector to this point is that there is a need for more locally owned, locally led firms to help drive that next phase of evolution in the market. So, it would be interesting to hear some of your reflections around the barriers that some of these local entrepreneurs face, and what some of the opportunities are for these local entrepreneurs to help accelerate the innovations that we'd like to see deployed.
That's a really good question. I think there's enough evidence out there to show that local entrepreneurs are probably some of the ones that are best able to identify the challenges in their community, but also the best approaches to be able to solve those problems. But I think for them, when we look globally and you talk about, for example, the level of funding, be it grants, be it equity investments, and even early stage investments that come to this sector, globally. And unfortunately, when you listen to local entrepreneurs, they'll tell you that's not their story. There's other firms may be able to access financing or have room to be able to try out their products, and ecosystem that allow them to access like university resources or other, people that have that ecosystem, but it's not their story. So I think one, they don't, to find, like for example in Kenya, you've got the Kenya Climate Innovation Center that has really allowed for local, young students and other entrepreneurs to go in, have this space that they access either equipment, like the Fab Labs and things like that, and have a space where they can try their product. They've got people that do some of the business model support around them, but that's too few of them are there, and we need much more of that. Then also, when they try out their technologies and they prove them, now accessing that capital to be able to help them scale. They also struggle quite a bit in able to be able to do that. And I don't know whether the issue is whether those that are considering the investments don't understand enough of how to evaluate them, and we probably need to do much more work to sensitize and train or inform the investment community on how to look and evaluate and also understand the local, what's that opportunity for those companies, or we do the vice versa, really upscale and support these local firms to be able to be better prepared to be able to access financing. And for me, I think also I would add that if on the public sector, that they also embrace them much more in their planning, so that whatever innovations come, they also try and mainstream them much more. I think we see some good examples there, but is it available for as many companies as possible? I think that's the jury is still out on that.
Thank you, Patrick. Really important reflections there on the important role that local entrepreneurs have to play. So Jim, moving on to you now. Sustainable Energy for All has a really critical coordinating role to play across the sector and helping to accelerate progress. It would be great to hear more about how SE for All is doing that. There's various initiatives that on the energy access side, SE for All is leading, mini-grid partnership, other things. Could you share with our audience a little more how collaboration can help to accelerate innovation in the sector?
Thanks, David. It's fantastic to be here. Thank you for having me. So for those of you, maybe I'll start a little bit of history about Sustainable Energy for All for those who might not be familiar with us. We like to think of ourselves as basically the engine room for the Sustainable Energy for All agenda and movement. And we're in fact established back in 2011 as a special initiative of the UN under Ban Ki-moon's leadership. And so one of the innovative aspects of our own origin story is that we were eventually spun out of the UN system in recognition that if we're going to achieve sustainable energy for all, we need to really forge meaningful partnerships with particularly the private sector, as well as other development partners. And I think there was a recognition that perhaps spinning an organization outside of the UN might be a better place to engage industry, investors, certain stakeholders that perhaps the UN naturally isn't able to engage as much. So we're an international organization. Our kind of core approach is really threefold. As you mentioned, our bread and butter is around raising ambition, around building a movement, mobilizing stakeholders, trying to raise ambition around sustainable energy for all. We do that through our diplomatic channels, convenings. Our CEO maintains a close relationship with the UN. She's also the special assistant to the Secretary General for Sustainable Energy for All. She's the co-chair of UN Energy, which is a body that coordinates all energy efforts around the UN. So we do a lot of upstream kind of diplomacy and convening, really to kind of ensure that all the right stakeholders are moving in the right direction, underpinned by the right data, the right analysis, and figuring out which direction to move. The second way we kind of advance this agenda is trying to seed the sector with knowledge, data, innovations. We clearly see there's a lot more that needs to happen, so we're trying to inject a lot of public goods into the sector that can be beneficial to both governments as development partners. One of our long-standing kind of flagship analytical pieces of work was a report series called Energizing Finance, which tracks the financing flows and the needs as it relates to SDG 7. And no surprise, there's a real dearth and lack of finance going particularly to the off-grid sector, and that's something that we all collectively need to work on. So that's the second pillar, is around kind of creating public goods through innovations, tools, resources that we seed in this sector, hopefully that blossom amongst our partners. The third is actually a relatively new area for us. In the last couple of years, we've kind of expanded our remit to provide more direct technical assistance and advisory work to countries, namely in recognition that we're in the final decade. And I think more or less everyone needs to start beginning to think about implementation and shorten that causal chain between what they're doing and impact on the ground. So we're now active in more than 20 countries, providing some combination of technical assistance, advisory work, with the idea that we are trying to demonstrate some of these innovations in countries and then feed that up into the more political spheres that we're involved in. That approach is basically applied to kind of two main strands of work. One is on energy access. That is our core mission, is to help countries achieve universal energy access. Our key priority within that is to help stimulate distributed renewable energy markets. We're a firm believer that distributed renewable energy technology, whether they're solar home system, mini grids, are some of the fastest, most cost-effective ways of reaching unserved populations, particularly those in remote rural areas. We kind of approach that task through kind of three main entry points. One is trying to help create the enabling environment that de-risks and crowds in private capital into the DRE market. The second is we kind of recognize that for some time this issue has been approached very much from a supply side point of view, and rightly so. Kind of the household market has really blossomed and is becoming more commercially viable, but when we think of energy access, we think well beyond households. There are schools, there are hospitals, productive uses of energy that we also need to pay attention to. So part of our mandate is ensuring that we maximize the social and economic impact of energy access, and it not just be about household electrification, as much as that's important. The last entry point for us is a no-brainer. It's about unlocking finance. I already mentioned, the lack of finance that's going into this space. So part of what we're trying to do is innovate around what kind of new sources of finance can we bring into this sector, whether it be carbon, climate finance, results-based financing. The second track of work, which is also kind of emerging piece of work for us, is we're finding more and more countries asking for assistance in not only helping them achieve energy access, but embedding that within a broader energy transition. And so we have a variety of different programs that span from helping countries on energy efficiency, expanding access to cooling, especially in a warming world. Cooling is becoming a critical issue for many countries. We're also helping countries develop energy transition plans and increasing their capacity to develop those plans and implement them. We actually recently assisted the government of Nigeria in developing an energy transition plan, which we were really excited to see helped the government there actually create a net zero pledge by 2060 last year. And now we have an embedded group of staff within the Vice President's office we call the Energy Transition Office, which is tasked with mobilizing resources and implementing that energy transition plan. So that's a little bit about kind of what we do, and like I said, underpinning all of this is a real belief that we can't do this alone, and we're kind of very partnerships driven. So we work closely with industry, GOGLA, AMDA, we work with development partners, really with the idea of trying to be that connective tissue between governments, development partners, and industry and investors. So that's a little bit about what we do and kind of how we approach this issue.
Super, thanks, Jim. Really a central role that you're playing in the sector to help provide that connective tissue, as you say, to bring those different strands of activity together. You touched on a few things there. One around that socioeconomic side and driving impact. There's fantastic work that SE for All is doing on empowering healthcare, on access to cooling, other things. You also touched on the point around scale in some of the countries that you're collaborating with. You mentioned Nigeria. There's one country working in Rwanda and elsewhere. Perhaps just wondered if you wanted to take one of those examples and dive into it a little deeper to show how that looks in practice for that breadth of work that SE for All's involved in to really drive some of these innovations and accelerations on the ground.
Happy to, David. And if I'm quick, I'll try to squeeze in more than one, but let me see. So I think innovation is kind of core to our DNA. And I'll give maybe one or two examples of how we're trying to innovate. So I mentioned how we kind of a recognition that we need to make sure that access is more inclusive to kind of maximize the social and economic benefits of access, whether it's for women and youth, whether it's for productive use, whether it's for social infrastructure. So about 10 years ago, in fact, with the assistance of what was then DFID, we established a program called Powering Healthcare in recognition that there's critical social infrastructure out there that doesn't have power, and that's compromising the ability to provide, in this case, quality healthcare services. Now, this was well before COVID, and I can count on perhaps one hand the number of organizations, development partners, even governments who were prioritizing this issue. And so over the last 10 years, we've really built up a program of work that's trying to raise awareness and priority given to this issue of how do we electrify social infrastructure like hospitals and healthcare facilities. I have to say, we worked hard to elevate this issue, but Ebola came around. We got a little bit more attention, but unfortunately, we kind of missed the opportunity in many respects. I think things have changed now with COVID. There's a lot more attention now to the importance of, rightly so, to electrifying social infrastructure. And so much of our work now is pivoting from making the case that we need to electrify social infrastructure, which is kind of ridiculous that we even need to make that case. It's pretty intuitive that we do. But to innovating around how we actually take solutions like standalone solar systems, like mini-grids, and apply them to health facilities. And that might seem rather obvious or easy, but it's actually not in practice. In fact, we find that there's no shortage of capital. There's no shortage of donor-funded programs that are installing solar home systems or solar systems in rural and remote clinics. But often what you'll find is that after a couple of years, they stop working for a lack of O&M. And this really has to do with business models. Traditionally the business model, the way you would deliver these systems is you would have a donor working with a government that would kind of pay for the CapEx. But then there wasn't much thought about how are you going to maintain that system. So over the last couple of years with development partners, we've been really trying to shift the focus from procuring systems to performance. And so we've been working with a number of development partners to apply some of the innovative business models that are coming out of the household solar market, like energy as a service, and seeing how we can apply that to social infrastructure. And in doing so, how we can crowd in some more private sector capital and expertise into an issue that has traditionally been kind of very much public sector led. So that's one example. I'll maybe leave it at that for now.
Great, thank you, Jim. Eva, Jim just touched on the performance point, and I think one of the things that we see is these innovators that are developing these breakthrough technologies and business models. Ultimately, to deliver that impact, they need to scale. They need to be deploying solutions, raising capital at scale. Chemco's involved in a range of work in this space, and it would be great to hear more about what Chemco's doing. The ways that initiatives like the Renewable Energy Performance Platform are helping those innovators to bridge the the gap and deploy solutions at speed and scale. So over to you.
Great, thank you. Hi everyone. So perhaps just starting a little bit with the background of what CAMCO does and what is the rep that you mentioned. That sounds very exotic. So CAMCO is a climate and impact fund manager. We manage mostly nowadays blended finance facilities that we design and deploy, trying to attract funding to areas that are normally considered too high risk for traditional investors. So we sort of do that work at the fund level, and then through these facilities are able to support local companies and projects. Ooh, the sound has just expanded. The Renewable Energy Performance Platform, or REP, with double P, it's one of the facilities that CAMCO manages. It was designed by UNEP and EIB and has been to date financed exclusively by UK government through their climate finance. So looking at Stephen here, it was BASE before and now it's the FCDO, who have decided to put a significant amount of capital to support this initiative around 2015. So we've been operating REP for some 6-7 years now. REP has been designed to support distributed renewables across the African continent. And by distributed, I think our definition expands a little bit further than what was mentioned here. So REP is able to finance off-grid, SHS, so solar home systems companies, mini-grids, and then isolated grids and small IPP projects. By small, we mean up to 25 megawatts, with one exception for wind power, which can be up to 50 megawatts. So still smaller scale, distributed renewables injected in sort of more locally into the main grid, which from our perspective, all of these, both off-grid and on-grid projects, are really, we talk about energy mostly from the mitigation perspective, but if we are looking at smaller scale distributed renewables, there are significant adaptation benefits that they can deliver. And so this is really what REP is all about. One more word about the mandate of REP is really flexibility. So we are able to offer financing across the spectrum, from debt to equity and everything in between, and really looking at filling the gaps. So whether it's through instruments like convertible notes or mezzanine finance, sort of bridge finance, not to get too much into the financial terms, but we're really there trying to help developers reach the financial close, reach their fundraising goals, to be able to take their work forward. Over those past 7 years, we've made some 50 investments in 17 countries on the African continent. 30 megawatts of active generation capacity, renewable-based generation capacity, and 350 megawatts in development. And we were very lucky to overcome, we're very happy to overcome the goal of 1 million connections supported through REP. We're now at around 1.2 million of new and improved energy connections. A lot of the firsts, so in terms of business models, and mobile power was mentioned, maybe I'll say a few more words about that as well, but in terms of the types of business models, the first kind of projects, like the first IPP, solar IPP in Burundi, first mini-grid concession projects, by the way, with a strong focus on social infrastructure, health in particular, and education in Sierra Leone, the project that Stephen helped the government put together through his work, and also Lesotho. Another sort of innovation comes through innovative finance instruments. So first time deploying project finance to mini-grids, support through debt instruments with variable interest loans, mezzanine finance for hybridization of solar projects. So really trying to kind of think outside the box in our work. So that's about REP. And then to answer the question about what innovators and what companies need to do to access that funding, I think there are probably several points that I'd like to mention, and I did want to say that there seems to be, even on the panel here among the speakers, this nice continuity where, for example, the mobile power was supported by Innovate UK and I think Energy Catalyst in their some of their experimentation innovation work in designing the technology and probably improving their business model as well. They then became ready for financing from REP. For us, REP is not a VC type of fund. We don't normally fund very early stage and slightly focus on slightly later. So with Mobile Power, I think that was Series A that we invested in. We were sort of a cornerstone investor and took them through this journey. That was one of the early investments, but we've seen, we've made investments in power gen, also quite early stage, and helped them grow and access additional financing in different forms. So this is again sort of highlights, I think, REP's ability and willingness to take the longer road and stick around, and kind of what's very important is to that's one of the points I wanted to highlight, is the understanding of the type of capital that you require, which is of course very difficult, and I understand it's very overwhelming for young entrepreneurs, especially more local entrepreneurs. I know there are now programs that Gogla is working on specifically with local developers. There are initiatives such as Get Invest and PFAN that are helping developers really in this journey to understand what type of funding they need at the stage where they're at, and then kind of helping them to access that type of funding. So this understanding is quite critical. That's kind of part of what probably the business model, which is the second aspect I wanted to stress. So business model in terms of having a sustainable and I would say realistic business model. Again, I think for a young entrepreneur that is trying to look for funding to scale their business, it's often very tempting to promise the world to investors. And while it can be very attractive, but in fact, I think it's all about transparency and building trust. And if you understand sort of where you are, what you're able to deliver at this stage, this is the road that you should highlight to investors. This is where I am today. This is what my business plan is. I'm here today. I aim to be there. And are you able to, come with me through this journey? That's in terms of being realistic. I think that's what we like to see. And with REP, we have come with them on this journey. So with Lesotho mini-grid developer called One Power, we invested in their pilot mini-grids and then helped them to secure funding, including through REP and EDFI, for the scale-up of a 10-site concession for mini-grids with the Mobile Power, PowerGen, PEG Africa, which is now part of B-Box. We actually made, in some cases, subsequent investments in different types of funding. So we didn't say no, right? Even if they said, we're here today, but we have these huge plans. And in fact, sometimes now in the mini-grid world, what I'm seeing, don't want to say too much, but we're seeing very ambitious, very passionate developers, and winning sort of. There's a lot of talk about scale, and we of course talk about DFIs, development finance institutions, not being ready to take on smaller scale tickets. So this is kind of where this pressure probably comes in. And then governments aim to design also these sort of larger scale concession programs, which I'm not saying is wrong, but at the same time, developers, in my view, need to be also realistic and at least convince us that they're ready to deploy the multiple portfolios of mini-grids across 5 countries, with having just a few pilot projects in hand. So it's, I would say, be honest and open. That's quite important. And maybe one of the final points, and again, speaking the investor language, I was asked to say, my question, the question to me was to sort of say what investors want to see. I fully acknowledge that investors also need to understand the realities that developers are in, so we also need to probably become better at speaking their language. But from sort of investors' perspective, there are requirements that we have. I mean, and especially if you're looking at financing from sort of more international space, we are talking about being compliant with some of the sort of bankable so some of the policies in, let's say, in the ENS, so environmental and social work, to name just one example. There are due diligence requirements that we have sort of to reach this bankability level. Again, I understand for young developers it might be difficult, but it's a journey that maybe they can take with some of the technical assistance support, and we're also trying to put that in place. So being kind of ready for this, understanding what the transaction kind of circle journey looks like, is quite important, and being responsive also about risk mitigation measures, if responsive and proactive, I would say, if that needs to be in place. And it really should be a conversation. So with REP and CAMCO, we're trying to make it a conversation, and I hope that it's the case with other funders as well.
Great, thank you, Ava. Some fantastic reflections there on what some of these innovators can do and what some of the investors can do as well, in terms of that openness, the business models, the way that these groups can engage with one another. One of the points you mentioned was around the continuum of capital, which I think around the continuum of capital. So, as you say, it's really important for these entrepreneurs to be able to come through some of that early stage, the piloting, the demonstration, the de-risking that helps REP and other platforms to come in. Interested in any reflections you have on, in terms of that continuum of capital, or even that continuum of support. What are some of the things that you're seeing that you think may still be needed in the market? What are some of the barriers that we haven't yet addressed that we need to work on to accelerate innovation and pull some of these solutions through to scale?
maybe it would be good if you defined what "we" stands for. Of course, we all work jointly, but we all speak from different perspectives. I think in terms of what we're seeing on the African market, at least, and the off-grid market in particular, and especially if we're talking about innovation and younger businesses, it's clear that equity type of funding is not sufficient at the moment. We are part of trying to solve that problem, but it is the higher risk capital, so it's natural that it's kind of underserved at the moment, but I think it's important to stress that message that we need to push those funders who are able and willing to do that towards this space, because that is now more kind of readily available, and many companies are, because they need capital, especially the on-grid space, continuous working capital as well, they're kind of keen to take on more debt, and then that leverage sort of ratio is no longer perhaps sustainable, especially because they do have a longer term perspective. They need this longer term patient capital perspective to be able to grow, innovate, try out different things. So that's probably what's missing, and I think, as I'm saying, like, we have some of this on offer, but of course we're not the only one. I'd probably push others to think about this as well, and also, there was a lot of talk, I think, starting from the high-level interventions at the start of the COP about how some of those institutions, like development finance institutions and multinational development banks, need to perhaps kind of deliver better on the high-risk end of the spectrum that they were technically established to do, or that they are, probably best placed now to do, and that's what's required. So I think that is also important to see and to encourage them to do so. Maybe that's it, but happy to follow up on some of this.
Super, thank you, Eva. Stephen, we've heard a lot of reflections from across the panel around innovation, the role that technologies, business models, finance, collaboration can play. UK government is supporting a range of different platforms, initiatives, activities in this area that are helping to accelerate innovation across that that spectrum of activity. For the audience here and those listening online, it would be great if you could introduce some of that work and share some of your reflections on how this support is helping to bridge some of these challenges that we're seeing across points that the various speakers have touched on.
Yeah, thanks, David, and it's great to be here. Maybe I'll just start by kind of sort of zooming in a little bit on the innovation piece, but further to the continuum of capital point, the way I think about the UK aid support in this area is running through from R&D, so the innovation grants, and I'll talk more about that in a minute, and particularly the Transforming Energy Access programme. But also country demonstrators, and this is where the bilateral programs come in, is like the Sierra Leone program you mentioned, where we try to support things at scale in particular countries. Then there's the kind of support relating to policy technical assistance. This is like UK PACT and sort of packages like that, supporting governments on information and on policy. And then you've got the investment area, and this is where REP are an example, also British International Investments and other platforms like that. So there's a kind of a flow there you can see from early stage, highly risky ideas through to what we're hopefully seeing as impact at scale and investments of concessional capital, which are then also leveraging the really, hopefully, very large volumes of private capital. So my particular job in all of that is to oversee and support the Aitken Fund, which is the UK's investment of up to £1 billion from our international climate finance into energy innovation. We programme that jointly with BEIS, the Department for Business, Energy, Industrial Strategy. And it involves a portfolio of work, but the one I'll go into a bit more deeply is the Transforming Energy Access programme, which is the largest single platform. And that's been running since 2016. And so in that first kind of 5-year period, we built up a lot of knowledge, a lot of learnings about the kind of things that we could do, where we could get the most results. And then T was scaled up in Glasgow at COP26 by £126 million. And now we're into another 5-year phase of that. And so, just maybe share a few of the things that we did and learned in that phase one, and then some of the priorities in the coming phase. We put quite a bit of effort, and I think we got some really great results out of a focus on data and capability. So this is kind of recognizing that for innovation to happen, there needs to be information, there needs to be data availability, people need to see what the needs are, what the resources are, all of that kind of stuff. And we supported quite a number of state-of-the-market reports on mini-grids, not least, but also on off-grid sector, SDG 7 tracking, and all that kind of information. And that's really, I think, a very solid place to put public funding, is creating those knowledge and data products. But going beyond that, it's all very well to have the information, but you need people able, with the capabilities to absorb and create new ideas out of that. So we put quite a lot of support into a range of skills and expertise programs, particularly in Africa, for this piece. And in the last 5 years, we supported the setup of 8 master's courses on sustainable energy in 8 countries in Africa, 8 African universities, which was really great to see the first cohorts of master's students enrolling in those programs in the last couple of years. And then also we supported 1,100 young Africans with secondments and their first job opportunities working in clean energy businesses. So amongst the GOGLA members and the mini-grid partnerships companies, giving them a chance to get work experience there. And in fact, more than 90% of those young secondees and graduates then went on to get full-time jobs with those businesses, which we were just really happy to see. And as well as supporting in-work training and sort of skills development, with a particular courses targeting female leaders in those businesses. So those are kind of longer-term investments. You don't see necessarily the results of those tomorrow, but those are really the kind of ecosystem supports that we wanted to do, and we'll be doing more of in the coming period. The next piece was around about open calls and the importance of funding an ecosystem. We can't always predict where the best ideas are going to be, so we need to be funding those startups and those new ideas, those joint ventures. And the biggest investment in this area is the Energy Catalyst, with which Alice leads. But also we funded a series of open calls in things like powering renewable energy opportunities. So how can we support connecting energy with productive uses? We support a series of really great projects, I think, on e-waste management and collection, and trying to kind of close the circle on energy waste and the businesses. And in fact, we've seen some really big growth in Nigerian, Rwanda, and Kenyan waste collection and recycling in that period. And also on the job creation side, the value addition. What can we do to support local value addition, which also creates a lot of different sort of drivers for uptake. So that was another important piece. The next one I want to highlight is technology accelerators. So I think open calls are great for funding that ecosystem and engaging a lot of players, but sometimes there's particular challenges you want to focus on. And so we had some great experience working with Cross Boundary, the Mini-Grid Innovation Lab. So they were really working with the developers in a more sort of focused way around about cost and revenue issues, and then trying a range of prototypes for how they could do that, which we co-funded together with Rockefeller. And again, in the coming period, there'll be some announcements tomorrow. In fact, I'll do a quick shout out. 12 noon on the UK Pavilion tomorrow, there's going to be a session where we're going to be making some announcements relating to this. So we're going to be, again, using that accelerators approach in the next phase, which I think is quite exciting. Venture building is the next one. So this is as the technologies become a bit more understood, a bit more it works in the lab, and there's a few proof of concepts. Then you need people to be taking businesses to the point where they're investable by the likes of REP, etc. And I think as a sector we've seen the likes of MCOPA, the D-Lights, these kind of businesses, the lead firms, create they punch through what's possible. And then they show what is feasible, and they attract capital, and then that inspires others to then follow. So we've been supporting, particularly with Shell Foundation and with Aitken, supporting investments in some of these lead firms, which we hope can then prove out new concepts and inspire others. And then the last thing I just want to focus on is on the market building piece. So these individual companies are great, and they can do a certain amount on their own, but I think even MCOPA found that at a certain point, on their own, they were never going to necessarily be able to engage on policy issues or the kind of the market conditions they needed. So they had to think and act more as part of a sector. And this is where Gogla, for example, comes in, the mini-grid partnership. And we've supported a series of these partnerships with Shell Foundation and also through other partnerships. The Global Distributors Collective is another example, supporting last mile distribution of products, energy products as well. Also in this category I include sort of platform plays. So we've had some really great success in the crowdfunding space, supporting the setup of Energize Africa, for example, which has now raised more than 30 million in working capital debt for household solar, mini-grid and other companies. So just connect. So those kind of platforms sort of support more than one company, but they just make it easier for them to succeed. So those are the kind of that in a way we through the first 5 years we sort of synthesized that into this then now the theory of change really for what we're doing in the next phase.
Great, thank you, Stephen, and really helpful overview of how UK government is helping take companies right from early stage to to investment at scale, and then within the early stage, the innovation piece, the different levers or intervention areas that you're supporting to help those companies to thrive. Just before we open it up to the audience for queries, I just wondered if perhaps on the venture or market building side, if you wanted to talk a little bit more about one of the the case studies of a venture you've worked with, perhaps one that's been involved in multiple of those areas, or just dive into one of those intervention areas in a little bit more detail before we open it up to the audience for questions.
Sure. Yeah, I think another, so that in a way what I've been through is like the toolkit almost of the kind of ways we provide support. I think maybe the bit that I didn't get to so much was the technology areas, like what are the priority areas? And I think for T2 in the coming period, some examples are things like energy storage, where we see the critical importance of energy storage for off-grid as well as on-grid renewables. And there's some really interesting stuff happening in that space. I think Acceleron is one that I think is really worth touching on. Acceleron is a circular economy lithium-ion battery pioneer, and they're really working on trying to create storage as a service, and they have some very clever technology that allows them to diagnose faults in lithium-ion batteries cell by cell, and then replace the cell rather than having to throw the whole battery out. And they've done, and again, they have a great example in that they've had Innovate UK, Energy Catalyst support. Then Shell Foundation was then critical in helping link them with a lot of the Gogla members, in fact, who then were benefiting and on mini-grids. But it doesn't stop with them. I think another really exciting one in the energy storage space is our support to sodium-ion battery research. So sodium-ion, for those who haven't heard of it, is a piece of research. Is a whole sector really, but it's just sort of responding to those issues around about lithium, cobalt, and the supply of those critical minerals, and trying to bring forward a salt-based alternative. If you think back to your periodic table, sodium and lithium are quite close to each other in the periodic table, and that gives you the idea of what's possible. So there's some really exciting stuff happening coming out of a consortium led by St Andrews University with Faradian and Indian Reliance. I think that's really one to watch. Also because it's a kind of technology, whereas lithium-ion, we're sort of inheriting lithium-ion from the auto sector, but sodium-ion is a bit more of a stable technology, better, more recyclable, and potentially more suitable for static applications. It's not quite as energy dense. So lots to say on energy storage, loads there. Also some really interesting stuff coming up on hydrogen, green grids, smart grid. Next generation solar is an interesting one we could probably debate on, but I think we see a real opportunity for more distributed production of solar, printed onto substrates and thin film, cooking, cooling, and I could mention interesting companies in all those sectors, but I'll leave it there.
Super, thank you, Stephen. Yeah, really exciting challenge areas that you've touched on, and great to see those examples of companies succeeding and really moving through that through that scaling support. Okay, so we've got loads of people in the audience. We've got a wealth of insights that you've heard from the panel. We have a roving mic. if you could introduce yourself, say your name, your organisation, and we'll perhaps grab a couple of questions, open it up to the panel, and we'll hopefully have time for, for a couple of rounds of these questions. So, perhaps over to the first questioner for the panel. Thanks.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Akash. I'm with Alliance for an Energy Efficient Economy, AEEE, India. My question to the panel is, if you could please comment a little bit on the role of data and transparency frameworks in terms of the critical metadata and the rigor of the analysis that should go behind it, and how it can play an important role in strengthening the relationship between investors and entrepreneurs, particularly the smaller ones. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Atash. So from AEEE, a question on data, and we have a question just,
Sorry. So my name is Gary Janks, and I'm the director of Contemporary Film Productions, and I've just made a film called Save the Wild Coast, or Warship of the Wild Coast. Stephen, you mentioned Shell. So the Amaponda people and Greenpeace Africa and Natural Justice together took Shell, Impact Africa, another British oil company, and the Minister of Energy. They took them to court and they beat them twice, and they permanently banned them from seismic blasting of the coast of Ponderland, the Wild Coast. It's a historic victory, and it's a landmark global precedent so that other indigenous peoples can stand up and fight for their lands and their oceans. So my question to you, and particularly Stephen, because I'm also a UK citizen, what are governments and what are your organizations doing to negotiate and have a dialogue with people like, organizations like Shell and the fossil fuel companies, to engage with them in a meaningful way? Because while it seems they are investing in renewable energies in a small capacity, they're continuing to open up new projects all across Africa. There's about 400 projects for natural gas and oil. And just to put it on a kind of time perspective, we've literally got 3 years to bring the graph down so that we can go down by 45% by 2030. And I'm talking on behalf of all the children in the world. I've got 3 children I adore. They don't have a future unless we do something to stop that graph and get it down and stop fossil fuel being proliferated into the atmosphere. And we've really got to do something now. We've got no time left. Please, can you answer that question? How can we engage with the fossil fuel companies and get them to transition fast enough to green energy themselves and not just help, other innovative ways? I mean, I only came in on the man in the middle. Sorry, I missed your name, but I've only heard the first 4 speakers, and I just want to say I've got the utmost respect for the innovation and the research and the work you're doing. And I don't want to knock that in any way, but I just think that we need to think of engaging with the fossil fuel industries in a meaningful way to get them onto the humanities side for the preservation of all life on the planet.
Thank you very much. Yeah, really important question on the fossil fuel transition and engagement with oil and gas companies. I think we might take one more question at the front here, and then we'll move down the panel, and you can pick off whichever questions you'd like to respond to. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, so my name is Varda Malik. I'm from Pakistan. I lead on investments on one of the FCDO-funded program in Pakistan, and I also have an advisory firm. My question to anyone on the panel, specifically on the financial bit that you were talking about, was, I mean, we talk a lot about innovations and shiny products and all those jargons and everything. How are we making sure that they are scalable? You cannot get scale without financing. You cannot get scale without public sector intervention. Private sector alone cannot scale anything. We've seen that, specifically from the part of the world where I belong. The second question that I had was, we often talk about innovation and technology for clean energy, we never talk about innovation in financing, which is correlating to that kind of technology innovation. So I guess, without talking about one without the other is probably not going to get us anywhere. Many products have come up, Pakistan, solar, wind, very minimum scale, 1 megawatt, 2 megawatt. We're still heavily reliant on fossil fuel and hydel, which is again, a large scale infrastructure projects. We're not able to scale because all the donors who come for research, innovation, nobody wants to fund the scale. I think that's the bottom line for it. And I think specifically to you, because you spoke a lot about, the financing bit of it, so maybe you could just shed some light on that.
Great, thank you. And another really important question around scaling and financing that scale up. So over to the panelists. We'll start with Felicity. We've got questions on data, on the fossil fuel transition and engagement with oil and gas companies, and then scaling and finance. Answer as many or as focused a set of those questions as you like.
Thank you, David. 3 really interesting questions. I'm going to start with the one on data. Data is vital, whether we're using GIS to identify the best places for location of solar water pumps, or using remote monitoring to understand the impact and the places where the systems work best, and to figure out where to plan ahead for maintenance and things like that. And of course, showcasing the potential of the appliances in a way that captures the imagination of funders and the users is really key. But data is also useful in non-technical ways, also in terms of showing the impact and making sure that we are all of our organizations are reporting in metrics that are aligned and can really maximize our understanding. But also in terms of understanding our audiences. We have limited data on who is using these appliances. We know that the average user of a solar home system is a man who lives above the poverty line and lives in an on-grid area. And that's great, but we're leaving people behind at the moment. We need to expand who we're reaching. 9 out of 10 refugees don't have access to energy, for example. We need to design ways to engage with them. And using greater understanding of who we are serving and who we're not serving is also really helpful in designing solutions that work locally and at a larger scale as well.
Great, thank you, Felicity. Alice, over to you.
So Innovate UK is part of the UK government, and in terms of what we're doing at talking to the big oil companies, we focus on SMEs. It's our niche bit that we do. We have access to SMEs from across the world, and that's our main focus. So I don't want to avoid your question, because I completely agree with you. It's massively important. But actually, it's not our role in the government to do that. But I didn't want to ignore it, so I wanted to cover that off. In terms of how to make sure that companies can scale, I think it's really understanding the purpose of making sustainable businesses. There is no point in investing or providing grant funding to a business which doesn't have an understanding of where it is in its innovation journey and actually where it can possibly scale and get to market. So where Innovate UK and Energy Catalyst kind of focuses on trying to de-risk it for later stage finance. We focus in on the smaller companies, we focus in kind of early, we do early to kind of late stage, so we'll do anything up to a pre-commercial demonstrator. But at that point, and the amount of money we give kind of shrinks along the way because it's meant to be closer to market, we're trying to get private investors along. And we kind of see that as a real big key to be able to make sure that's scaling opportunity. Because if you get investors along with the journey, they're much more likely to, 1, understand your business, 2, want to provide further investment so you can start doing those large-scale projects which ultimately have the most impact. It's not easy, it's difficult because investors are well known in the energy industry for liking to be the second or third ones to do something, not always the first. But the money that we can provide helps them provide confidence that this is something that's worth investing in. So I think that's a massive key to making sure it works. And alongside that, a lot of the SMEs that we work with, they're small, they are great, but they don't necessarily have the business acumen of a really large company. So it's how do we provide that support, especially around finance, to go, well, do you actually know what type of finance do you need? Do you know how to get it? And actually on each stage of that journey, making sure they've got access to the right people, but with the right, I guess, support behind them to make sure that they can do that.
Great, thank you, Alice. Patrick, Gogla provides a lot of data in the space, but you may also want to touch on some of the other points. Over to you.
So I think first on data, I mean, data is needed, and we don't have enough data in so many areas, right? So when we look at our space, when our companies are trying to decide, for example, where should they go, or what are the areas to focus on innovation, what are the size of the market, what exactly would they need in terms of the use case, what type of users, where they are at, all that needs data, and there's just not enough data available at that level. Then secondly, beyond that, when we talk to development partners or to governments around the impact of our sector, to be able to show in a fiscal and economic impact way that we are a good investment, we need much more data on that. And so I don't need to go into the details, but we do need that data. A lot of work Gogla has also been doing is collecting, for example, market data, because when we talk to investors and try and show all types of investors, from debt to equity to all that we are a viable industry to invest in, that it's good investment. Again, we also need data from the industry to be able to show that we are reaching people, we are serving a need, the businesses are financially viable. So I think more data is needed, and if we can invest in that, awesome. Secondly, I think really to the lady from Pakistan, in terms of scalability, this is actually one of the things that we wrestle with, right? We know we don't have enough capital in our space. When we look, for example, in our sector, in terms of how much investment has been coming in, and how much we need to be able to reach the SDG 7 goal, I think we need probably about 7-10 times more. And the big question we've also been now trying to talk to all partners, including governments, is look at the type of capital. We need public funding to come into this space. And the public funding could be on the ecosystem. It could also be directly to the industry through reduction of taxes and programs that they do. We also need the development funding to come into the space. We need funding to go to the companies. We need company funding to go to the consumers. We need funding on the broader ecosystem. There's just not enough. And because of that, it's really constraining. So I think that's a really good question. And everybody really needs to engage. We've got data to show where that funding needs to go to. And then I think the last one I'll touch on briefly is this question from Gary. And I think for us historically, when we look, right, energy access across the globe has always received public funding. And now as we're talking about the scaling up renewable energy, one of the things we've been saying is if you've been subsidizing kerosene, which generates black soot, what are we applying the same level of investment and public support to the scale up and adoption of renewable energy? And unfortunately, the truth is no, and we need to apply much more of that so that we are actually supporting communities to be able to transition from either no energy access or this poor, technologies that are not climate smart, to be able to also adopt what we are pushing. And I think this is one of the clarion calls we need to be doing, to say what are we actually supporting to be able to see scale up and adoption of renewable energy. I'll wind up in saying that even when we look at our space, right now I think it's partially true that those who are left behind are actually being left to commercial solutions to buy or access their energy needs, and we need to do much more to be able to support them and access renewable energy solutions.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Over to you, Jem.
Thanks, David. I'm going to perhaps start with addressing the question of data from the gentleman. I didn't really mention it before, but well, I kind of mentioned that one of the entry points for us is trying to create that kind of market condition, that enabling environment. So I think in many respects, I kind of agree with the panelists. As a sector, we're flying blind. Governments don't really know where to allocate resources, neither do investors. The private sector doesn't really know where the attractive markets are. Historically, electrification, clean cooking, or especially electrification, planning was really just kind of, where the utility will extend the grid. We've come a long way. We have a lot more tools at our disposal, a lot of new digital tools like geospatial analysis and data that we at SC for All now have created a program around called Universal Energy Access Planning. And the whole idea is to leverage all of this geospatial data, analytics, big data, AI, to better inform decision making, both at a policy level, but as well amongst practitioners. And we do that by helping countries develop integrated energy access plans. So these are plans that integrate not only grid extension and densification, but mini grids, solar home systems. We look at the demand side, social infrastructure, productive use, and marry those together using kind of this sophisticated data to really visually identify what is the least cost way of achieving electrification and making that data publicly available, both for industry to say, okay, here in this part of Nigeria, there's a promising market for solar home systems. It's obviously very useful for utility and planners. It gives them a sense of what, the scale of investment that's needed by different technologies. Speaking of innovation, I mean, that's not a new thing for the electrification world, but it's a very new thing for cooking, and we haven't really spoken about cooking. Let's not forget that 3 billion people around the world lack access to clean cooking. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is take some of this big data, GIS, geospatial analysis and analytics, and bring it to the clean cooking sector as a way to almost like a common area for the clean cooking sector to figure out where resources are needed. Because compared to the power sector, the clean cooking sector is extremely fragmented. Typically, there's no single agency within a government that's mandated to kind of achieve universal clean cooking. So we're now working with governments. We've launched an integrated energy planning plan/tool in Nigeria that includes electricity, cooking, social infrastructure, productive use. Just did the same in Malawi. That's again using data. These are all data-driven, and now working with the government of Rwanda to develop a very detailed, data-driven clean cooking plan. So I just wanted to highlight one example of something that we're trying to do around this data issue. Thank you.
Super, thanks, Jim. And yeah, really important reflection on that, that critical gap around clean cooking. Eva, over to you.
Thank you. I think on data, sorry, is this working? On data, it's a no-brainer, but my colleagues have already talked about it. Yes, of course, more data would not only inform our investment decisions, but would also build trust, as you suggested, between the companies. And in some of our projects, even just access to monitoring data of how their operations are going is already very helpful for us, sort of in terms of further thinking. Very briefly to your response, again, would probably say what Alice said, that it's not really primary focus for us, but so as CAMCO, we are part of several membership organizations which include sort of larger corporates, etc. And so there we are, I would say, at least trying to facilitate this conversation and show our, I hope, good example, and also the facilities that we designed to help them come along that way. So through the blended finance, where some of them can invest in, we're trying to do our part there. On the finance, so great question, and you kind of brought back some of that discussion that we had on, the fact that there's a circle, let's say, or a journey to take in terms of sort of financing stages. On the demand side, again, the colleagues mentioned that there is an important point of building capacity of companies to make sure they're ready to take on and sort of scale and take on more capital. On the sort of supply side, the financing side, I think, I stressed before that it's important that developers and companies understand the different types of financiers. It's a huge world, and we're, all the different financing, institutions and instruments and platforms can be quite confusing. There is probably part of this work for us in the finance community to do as well, to collaborate more, and I know that some of these discussions are now started in Kigali Forum for Off-Grid and other, where sort of to try to bring different financiers together, those that are providing more earlier stage finance sort of, and then onwards, and make sure that we are also collaborating more in terms of kind of helping those companies come on this journey. With REP, of course, we're maybe fortunate that we were able to, we have more flexibility in holding their hand and having that more patient approach. What enabled us to do that, of course, is that the first REP is purely grant funded by UK government. That was exceptionally beautiful situation. We're bringing it to the next level, which will be a blended finance approach. So REP 2, let's say, what we're calling, which we're fundraising for now. And as Patrick mentioned, public finance will be critical. So at that facility level, to enable us to still maintain this sort of slightly, let's say, riskier approach, or to enable us to apply this longer term view, we do need to make sure that when we talk about public capital and the role that it plays, that it is catalytic. I think a lot of the time, we haven't been focused strongly enough. It depends on the sector. Some of the sector, in some of the sectors, market-based approach is not that ready yet. So maybe we're talking 1 to 2, but generally we should be talking sort of 3, 4, 5 times of mobilization. So blended finance facilities is something that helps, I would say, a lot of the bigger funders to come into the space. And you're right, there's not a lot of conversation in terms of sort of innovation, both at deal level and at fund level. I'd be happy to share more about what we do at Camco in terms of designing facilities. I didn't speak about Spark, but Spark for CNI, solar and energy efficiency, has been designed in a way that we are able to fund small energy efficiency projects and also smaller solar projects, and helping local developers come into the space and build their capacity to become sort of full-scale on developers. So there's a lot that needs to be done. Probably more collaboration between funders, more sharing of learnings, trying to push some of us, or encourage longer-term outlook, and more sort of in the off-grid space in particular, be able to offer kind of longer-term, continuous sort of follow-on investments as well, which would obviously help companies save their time in terms of fundraising and taking the next step.
Thank you very much, Chieva. And a couple of minutes left, Stephen, and then I'll just very quickly run us out. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for all those questions. A couple of quick thoughts. I mean, we already talked about the data piece, and I talked about our support to that. I think one area we haven't touched on, though, is connecting data more with investment and also flows of capital and transparency in that respect. And I think one thing we're really missing in this sector is a more systematic form of incentive, or that captures the kind of the carbon value, the social value, the impact value. At the moment, the grants have to do that, but the grants they're limited in scale, and they can only. So we need that. If we could actually get the carbon finance. So one of the innovations we're supporting with Shell Foundation, in fact, is CAVEX, which is Nick Hughes and the guys behind Copa are leading on, and that's all about trying to simplify and speed up the process of getting carbon finance. So they do the accreditation, and then smaller businesses, local businesses, can then use their platform to start drawing down that capital based on these verifiable results, which are coming from the product, as opposed to every single business having to go through all that gold standard process. So I think, especially where the data is connected with capital and transparency, then there's an even better example or a rationale for it. So on Shell Foundation, so it's Shell Foundation we work with, not Shell Corporate. So Shell Foundation was created with a grant, an endowment from Shell Corporate, which I think I have no doubt and no worries about the efforts that Shell Foundation put in our partnership together. I think on the broader transition, I mean, it is a bit outside the scope, but I think we're at COP is a fair point to raise. And I think the point that I guess that I would come back to is we're in a transition. This is a transition. We want the transition to be fast, but in the meantime, we're still relying as society and economies on fossil fuels more than we want to be and more than we need to be. But what we need is basically the clean solutions to become more cheaper and better more quickly, and then we've got some big policy statements: net zero by 2050, no new diesel and petrol vehicles past 2030. So these businesses are going to have to respond to that. But this is also why I think we're putting this money in. 25 million people relying on diesel generators in developing countries. You know, they don't really want that. We don't really want that. But while that's the least, that's how they provide their energy, then that's what they're going to have to do. So this is why I think this is the innovations, although they might seem a little bit far away. I think one of the great things about this sector is that the innovations aren't quite as far away as you think. Hydrogen seemed like a pipe dream the other day, but it's a bit closer now, and same with the storage. So I think that's why I think we want to bring these forward, and so that we end up displacing the rationale for those products, and then, you know, hopefully that transition will happen faster. But very last point is on to really support the point on financial innovations, and I'm sorry if that didn't come out even more strongly, but I mentioned crowdfunding, the carbon finance, some great work on results-based financing, you know, and on trying to kind of find ways to do that. Pay-go, of course, was a really important, you know, breakthrough in the off-grid solar sector. And I think, in fact, tomorrow at 6, I'm moderating a panel on the World Bank Pavilion as well about DARES, a new initiative that they've got on at-scale financing. So there's always more need, but I do think there's some really good signals that things are happening. And Green Climate Fund as well. I'd love to see more energy access projects going into and successfully being funded there. So yeah, lots to do, but I think also some really great stuff to build on.
Super, thank you, Stephen. And on that optimistic note, we'll bring this to a close. We've heard some fantastic engagement around, you know, productive use, local entrepreneurship, finance and scale, collaboration across the sector, the different ways that these innovations can be supported to come to market. So thank you very much to you, the audience here and online. Thank you very much to Felicity, Alice, Patrick, Jim, Eva and Stephen, and we hope you enjoyed the session and enjoy the rest of COP27. Thank you.